What 100 fact is the hardest to believe? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. If 1 billion people from both China and India didn't exist, they would still be the 1 and 2 most populated nations in the world. Story 2. An Australian man won the lottery, then on camera to reenact the winning with the news he bought another ticket, he won the lottery again on camera. Story 3. That only 6 people have survived rabies. Rabies has a 99 mortality rate. You can have rabies for an entire year without symptoms, and once you have symptoms, it's already late. You'll probably die in a couple of days if you have symptoms. Story 4. That dolphins can eliminate violation and injure people, and they have. It's just hard to believe that an animal that looks innocent can eliminate you. Story 5. Very few mosquito species prefer human blood, but among those that do, only 5 are deadly to humans. Those 5, though, eliminate more people annually than humans do. Story 6. The Australian funnel web spider is often regarded as the world's deadliest and hasn't had a confirmed eliminate in over 40 years since the antivenom was created. Story 7. President Jimmy Carter rappelled into a nuclear reactor that was in partial meltdown to stop the meltdown and save Ottawa, before he became president, of course. Story 8. In '95, a man named MacArthur Wheeler robbed 2 banks at gunpoint. He was arrested mere hours later because he didn't wear a mask. Instead, he decided to coat his face in lemon juice because he read that lemon juice can be used to make invisible ink. His logic was that it would make his face invisible, and reportedly he said to one of the tellers, "Don't worry, I have a face, it's just invisible." The only thing he did when he was arrested was sigh dejectedly and say, "But I wore the juice." His case is actually still in academic journals regarding the fact that people with low intelligence do in fact believe that they're smarter than everyone else. ETA. This man was 45 fudge years old. Story 9. From the time it was discovered to the time it lost its status as a planet, Pluto made it less than a third of the way around the sun. Story 10. That a spy named Joan Pujol Garcia was awarded the highest honor of service from both the Allies and Axis in the Second World War. Story 11. 23 of Canada's population lives south of Seattle. Edit. Here's a visual. Edited edit. Here's an even better visual with commentary. Story 12. Ciabatta bread was invented in 1982. It's advertised and perceived as this traditional rustic Italian bread that peasants must have enjoyed, but nope, created in the 1980s. Story 13. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip, and on the day he was supposed to leave, the atomic bomb dropped. He survived with minor injuries and returned to his home in Nagasaki, where he went to work 3 days later. As he was describing his experience to his supervisor, the second bomb was dropped, and he survived without any injuries. He ended up living into his 90s. Story 14. Dinosaurs are older than grass. Every artist rendition you've seen of them roaming fields is wrong. Most ground-level plants were ferns or flowering bushes, not grass. Story 15. Clouds weigh hundreds of thousands of pounds, full of water, effortlessly floating above our heads. No support, no structure, just weight, floating around above us, and we're like, yep, totally believable, because they're clouds. Duh. Story 16. It took humans more time to go from bronze swords to steel swords than steel swords to nuclear bombs. Story 17. The loudest sound in recorded history was the Krakatoa volcanic eruption of 1883. It ruptured the eardrums of people more than 40 miles from the epicenter, created a sound wave that circled the globe 7 times, and could be heard all the way in New York City, a short 10,000 miles away. Answer. Read Simon Winchester's book, Krakatoa, and prepare to be amazed. You know, it was a hell of an event if an entire book can be written about it. What I love learning is how the ash affected the appearance of skies all around the earth for years, creating all the vibrant sunsets we find in paintings from that era. It's just stunning, but all his work is. Story 18. For 60 million years, there was no bacteria, fungus, anything to decompose trees. They just got crushed under the weight of other dead trees. This is where about 90 of coal comes from. Story 19. The U.S. has a 1.4 billion pound cheese surplus. It's all stored in the Ash Cheese Cave in Missouri. Edit. Okay, I think if we can harness the energy of the people who stormed Area 51, we could easily liberate the cheese. Answer. I live in Springfield, Mo, where the cheese is stored. Full-time guards, and no one is allowed in the underground unless you work there or you have someone that will sign for you. Basically like a military installation. It's not a cave either. It's a limestone mine that's still being mined, and it's bigger than you could ever imagine. I think there are some YouTube videos that show the inside. Springfield Underground is what it's called. Story 20. As a vet tech, I learned that when a dog has an eye ulcer, We draw their blood and spin it down and take the serum to use as eye drops. We put dogs' own blood in their eyes to heal it. Story 21. Collagen tissue in the human body forms a crisscross pattern everywhere except one place, the eyes. There, the collagen tissue forms parallel to each other, allowing for transparency, which allows us to see. Story 22. Haagen-Dazs has no meaning in any language. It was meant to sound European. It was started by Reuben Mattis, a Polish immigrant to New York who sold fruit ice and ice cream from a horse-drawn cart. Story 23. MLK and Anne Frank were both born in the same year, but we associate them with different time periods. Edit, remove vastly because people were being sticklers about semantics. Story 24. The closest U.S. state to Africa is Maine. The entirety of continental South America is further east than Detroit, Michigan. Answer. Up to 200 years ago, sailors would depart NYC en route to San Fran. They would sail for months fighting their way around the Horn and finally stop in Argentina, edit, my bad, I meant Chile, to take on provisions. The navigator would take out his sextant only to discover they are further east than when they started. Also, in the middle of the Panama Canal, you look east toward the Pacific Ocean and west toward the Caribbean Sea. Story 25. There are 169,518, 829, 100,000, 544,000, 100,000, approximately 1.7 1029 ways to play the first 10 moves in chess. Additionally, the number of distinct 40-move games in chess is far greater than the number of electrons in the observable universe. Story 26. That as of 2005, there were still about 300 women receiving survivors' pensions from the American Civil War. Story 27. The reason there are so few mummies left is because back in the Victorian era, they ate most of them. Story 28. There's less time between Lincoln's second inauguration and Joe Biden's birth than there is between Biden's birth and his own inauguration. When Harriet Tubman was born, Thomas Jefferson was still alive. When she died, Ronald Reagan had already been born. Time is short. Story 29. Wade Boggs drank 50 beers on a cross-country flight and then absolutely destroyed the Seattle Mariners the next day. Story 30. The healthy human ear makes a sound back when it receives certain frequencies. It's called an otoacoustic emission, and it is used to test newborn hearing. I used to work for a research lab at Northwestern University that studied diagnostic applications. Story 31. That the reason there are petrified trees is because fungus hadn't evolved to break them down. The world would be much different without it. Story 32. Magnolias are pollinated by beetles because they evolved before the existence of flying insects. Story 33. Seth MacFarlane had a ticket for Flight 11 on 911. He ran late due to a hangover, missing the flight by only 10 minutes. Story 34. My students usually freak out when they realize that George Washington and Mozart were alive at the same time. Story 35. Narwhals for me. It's so unbelievable to me I teach my middle schoolers that they are indeed real. It's very important that they not make it into their 30s thinking unicorn of the sea meant it was just as fake as a unicorn. Story 36. That every woman is born with every single eggshell ever have already inside of her ovaries. 2 of my kids are 17 years apart in age, and it blows my mind to think that they floated around in there together, all like catch you later, bro. Story 37. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, that particular order of cards has almost certainly never existed before. Of all the decks of cards ever shuffled in history. Story 38. The polarizing filter experiment. Polarizing filters block certain orientations of light. If you place 2 polarizing filters in series oriented at 90 degrees to each other, they will block 100 of the light. But if you add one more filter in the middle, oriented at 45 degrees to both, some light gets through all of them. You added a filter that blocks light to a system in which all the light was blocked, and it allowed more light to get through. It does block all the light if the 45-degree filter is in front or back, though. The order matters. The light knows how. Why? Answer. It seems really weird when you phrase it like adding a filter that blocks light increases the light that comes out. But a polarizer isn't merely a filter. Each photon always has some superposition of polarizations. When there are n photons arriving at a polarizer, the number of photons that makes it through is a function of the difference between the polarization of the polarizer and the polarization of the photons. If the photons are 90270 degrees different from the polarizer, 0 of the photons go through. If the photons are any other angle away from the polarizer, some percentage of them go through, and are now the same polarization as the polarizer. If the first and last polarizer are 90 degrees apart, no matter how many photons make it through the first one, they'll all be blocked by the second one. If you add a 45-degree polarizer, then if some photons make it through the first one, then some are statistically guaranteed to make it through the second one and have that new polarization, and consequently make it through the last one. Edit. I'm intentionally leaving out the details of wave superposition and quantum statistics. It's just easier to hand-wave those details for this explanation. Edit from thread below. The real explanation is that all polarization is a superposition of two linear polarization eigenstates. For example, x and y, which are orthogonal to the pointing vector of the wave, an yes, they are waves. In this reference frame, all polarizations can be defined as a superposition of these two polarization eigenstates, and each photon exists in some superposition. When that photon encounters a physical object that measures its polarization, the first polarizer, set to x, the wave function collapses and a single eigenstate is instantiated. The photon is in the x state. The x state, though, is itself a superposition of two other polarization eigenstates, xy and yx, in the reference frame of the second polarizer. The second polarizer measures which of these the first, which is now x, rather than whatever original superposition it had, and determines it's actually in xy, etc. This is the real explanation, and it requires way more background to grasp. In actuality, the polarizers do change the photon. They establish a new eigenbasis and pick out a single new eigenstate of the photon, which is indeed changing the photon. It's indeed not the same as rotating the polarization, but it's close enough for the layperson that I didn't mind using the simplification for the purposes here. Story 39. The concept of gravity. The more I learn about it, its properties, the math involved, how it interacts with time, the more it just seems like magic. Edited, it's. Story 40. There are more ways to arrange a standard deck of cards than atoms that make up the Earth. 52 factorial. Story 41. That dinosaurs actually really existed. My mind still can't perceive that those animals walked where we are living right now. They seem so fictional when I think about them. Story 42. Women couldn't vote in all elections in Switzerland until 1991 and could vote in federal elections until 1971. Story 43. You're terrified of the wrong things. Your chance of being in a plane crash is 1 in 11,000. Even if you are in one, your chance of surviving is 95. Flying in a plane is actually one of the single safest things you can do. The reason that, and there were no survivors crashes make the news and stay there for months, is that they're extremely rare. U.S. airlines collectively had 11 crashes total in 2020. Yes, you read that right. 11, none of which were fatal at all. You're massively more likely to be struck by lightning. Even that isn't all that deadly. 9-10 people struck by lightning survive. Everybody is terrified of children being kidnapped by strangers. This is another thing that is actually pretty rare. Most kidnappings that do happen involve close family. The rest is mostly by people the children know. The most common cause of kidnapping is actually parental, usually involving some kind of custody dispute. Generally speaking, this will have no danger to the child at all. Statistically speaking, the most dangerous thing to a child is a step-parent. Even then, however, the chance of a child being kidnapped is 1 in 300,000. It just isn't something that happens often. This is again something that makes the news as it isn't a common occurrence, but also resonates with people. Yes, it's incredibly awful when something terrible happens to a child, but fortunately it isn't a common thing. Shark attacks are also statistically extremely rare. There are usually only a few more than 100 every year. Sharks aren't terribly interested in eating people. Usually if they attack a person, it's because visibility was low and the person looked like its prey somehow, or the person pissed it off. What should you be afraid of? Sugar. Seriously, fudge sugar. Read about all the horrible things that eating a lot of sugar does to you. It makes you far more likely to die of every leading cause of passing that exists. It's actually one of the leading causes for decreased lifespan in modern society. The more we started eating sugar, the less healthy we got, and the more our life expectancy flattened. While the rest of the world is getting better in the Western world, we're eliminate ourselves with sugar. Answer: it doesn't help that fat got a smear campaign in the 70s, IURC, against it, paid for by the sugar companies. The basic idea was fat makes you fat, eat sugar instead. It worked, and low-fat foods were in high demand. The problem is fat gives a lot of flavor, so that gap had to be substituted, and one way they did that was drumroll by adding sugar. Story 44. If the Earth was a perfect sphere and a rope went around it pressed against the ground, only 6.28 feet would need to be added to its length in order to hover the rope 1 feet above the ground. Story 45. Nuclear energy is safe. The waste is easily manageable because it's solid, and it would do so much better the job to save the climate crisis than so-called green energy. Everyone trying to argue with that is just proving my point here. Story 46. Every atom of iron in your blood was formed in the core of an exploding, a collapsing star millions of years ago, millions of miles away. Answer. Well, IRC, literally all of the atoms in our body that aren't at helium, hydrogen, or lithium were all forged in stars that eventually went supernova. Those three elements were the only elements present before the formation of the first stars. All subsequent elements were forged by stars, distributed into the universe via supernova, then reforged again into even heavier elements in new stars. Humans are made up almost entirely of space dust. Story 47. That nothing touches anything, really. On a molecular level, the electron's negative charge repels other electrons in other objects, and nothing really touches. Even your fingers, pushing them hard up against each other, actually doesn't touch. Edit, RIP inbox. Story 48. What are there more of? Trees on Earth? Stars in the Milky Way galaxy? Or neurons in your brain? It's trees. Trees on Earth somehow, on our little blue dot. Story 49. The distance, the amount of DNA in your body stretches if laid end to end. I think it's something ridiculous like to the moon and back 4 times. Answer just, remember that you're standing on a planet that's evolving and revolving at 900 miles an hour. That's orbiting at 19 miles a second, so it's reckoned. A sun that is the source of all our power. The sun and you and me and all the stars that we can see are moving at 1 million miles a day in an outer spiral arm at 40,000 miles an hour of the galaxy we call the Milky Way. Our galaxy itself contains 100 billion stars. It's 100,000 light years side to side. It bulges in the middle, 16,000 light years thick, but out by us, it's just 3,000 light years wide. We're 30,000 light years from galactic central point. We go round every 200 million years, and our galaxy is only one of millions of billions. In this amazing and expanding universe, the universe itself keeps on expanding and expanding in all of the directions it can whiz as fast as it can go, the speed of light, 12 million miles a minute, and that's the fastest speed there is. So remember, when you're feeling very small and insecure, how amazingly unlikely is your birth, and pray that there's intelligent life somewhere up in space, because there's bugger all down here on Earth. Story 50. In the movie Cars 2, 2011, post-911 security measures at airports are shown. The movie also, however, explains that airplanes are sentient and have free will. Therefore, in this universe, the airplanes are responsible for 911. Story 51. If, and that's a big if, humanity could invent a fuel that allows constant acceleration for a spaceship, then even moving at a paltry 1G acceleration, same as what you're feeling right now, you can traverse the entire Milky Way galaxy in just 12 years, or 24, if you want to stop at the other end. 100,000 years would have passed by on Earth, but that's a different matter. Story 52. The country of Greece didn't exist until 1830. In ancient history, the population was spread out into individual city-states that had different culture. Answer. This is not really true. Yeah, a country by the name of Hellas, Greece may not have existed before 1830, but Greek identity and a Greek state had existed long before then. The greatest example is the Byzantine Empire. The main reason historians gave it a new name to differentiate it from the Roman Empire was because of how Greek identity had completely superseded Latin identity. Towards the end, it became more and more a Greek ethno-state. The Greek identity was so strong that it endured through 400 years of Ottoman rule. In 1830, they just decided to call the state Hellas, Greece because it would have been out of place to try and redeclare the Byzantine Roman Empire again, as much as some Greek nationalists may have wanted to. Story 53. That we are all made of stardust. Every atom in your body and on this planet was once fused by a star. Edit. As someone pointed out below, all the atoms other than hydrogen are made of stardust. Hydrogen atoms come from the Big Bang. Still, every atom in our bodies and in this universe is either from the Big Bang or stars. Story 54. That most of all the stresses of modern society is a construct created by humans, for humans, and our most basic needs for survival are mostly not dependent on our ability, but by the allowances others give us. Story 55. Even when asked for the hardest to believe fact, near to no one bothers to provide sources. Source, this thread. Story 56. The chestnut blight eliminates so many trees that if we burn the wood from all of them, it would produce 800 quadrillion joules of energy, which is 10,000x the energy from the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Source, Salmonella Mao. Story 57. A kangaroo can jump higher than a one-story house. This is due to the kangaroo's muscular thighs and tail and the fact that houses can't jump. Story 58. There was a very, very, very slim chance of you specifically being born. Your mom meeting your dad, the exact time they did the deed, the exact sperm and egg that makes you interacting. It's so rare. Story 59. The average male body part length is 5.5, and the average male body part length of a man who Googles average male body part length is 3.5. Story 60. South America is not directly south of the United States. The westernmost part of South America is lined up with Florida. If you travel directly south from any point in the U.S. that is west of Florida, you'll go through Mexico, then end up in the Pacific Ocean. Essentially, we believe that the Pacific Ocean is to the west of the U.S., but it's also to the south. We believe South America is to the south, and it is, but it's also very far to the east. Story 61. Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as passing, life is only a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather. Story 62. Some of the weird math ones. If you choose one of 3 doors for a prize and are shown a door that doesn't have the prize, you are statistically more likely to win the prize if you switch doors. It should be a simple 50-50, right? But it isn't. Story 63. 2 tablespoons of nutmeg, approx 2 whole nuts, can cause a severe enough reaction to eliminate someone. Story 64. President Ronald Reagan knowingly ordered Oliver North to partner with substances lords in Los Angeles to sell crack cocaine to American citizens. Story 65. In between the space of the Earth and the Moon, you can fit every single planet in our solar system with a little bit of space to spare. Story 66. If 10,000 years ago someone had put a giant mirror in space 10,000 light years away, then you looked at the mirror with a giant telescope, it'd be 10,000 more years before you could see it, and then you'd be seeing Earth as it was 20,000 years ago. Story 67. For everything we've learned, there has been just as much lost knowledge. For example, there's a 23-foot-tall iron pillar in Delhi that was made close to 2,000 years ago. There is essentially no rust on it, and it's 2,000 years old. Meanwhile, we can't make a bridge truss that lasts 100 years. Also, there are concrete Roman seawalls that are also close to 2,000 years old that have been exposed to water for that entire time, and they're in good condition. Our concrete crumbles after a decade or so. Story 68. Every time a deck of cards is shuffled, it is overwhelmingly likely that no deck has ever been arranged in that order in the history of the world. There are more possible arrangements of a deck of 52 cards than there are atoms that make up the entire Earth. Answer: 52 factorial. Michael from Vsauce did a bit on this unbelievable number. This number is beyond astronomically large. I say beyond astronomically large because most numbers that we already consider to be astronomically large are mere infinitesimal fractions of this number. So, just how large is it? Let's try to wrap our puny human brains around the magnitude of this number with a fun little theoretical exercise. Start a timer that will count down the number of seconds from 52 to 0. We're going to see how much fun we can have before the timer counts down all the way. Start by picking your favorite spot on the equator. You're going to walk around the world along the equator, but take a very leisurely pace of 1 step every billion years. The equatorial circumference of the Earth is 40,075,017 meters. Make sure to pack a deck of playing cards so you can get in a few trillion hands of solitaire between steps. After you complete your round-the-world trip, remove 1 drop of water from the Pacific Ocean. Now do the same thing again. Walk around the world at 1 billion years per step, removing 1 drop of water from the Pacific Ocean each time you circle the globe. The Pacific Ocean contains 707.6 million cubic kilometers of water. Continue until the ocean is empty. When it is, take 1 sheet of paper and place it flat on the ground. Now fill the ocean back up and start the entire process all over again, adding a sheet of paper to the stack each time you've emptied the ocean. Do this until the stack of paper reaches from the Earth to the Sun. Take a glance at the timer. You will see that the 3 leftmost digits haven't even changed. You still have 8.063 more seconds to go. 1 astronomical unit, the distance from the Earth to the Sun, is defined as 149,597,870 91 kilometers. So, Take the stack of papers down and do it all over again, 1,000 times more. Unfortunately, that still won't do it. There are still more than 5.385 E67 seconds remaining. You're just about a third of the way done. To pass the remaining time, start shuffling your deck of cards. Every billion years, deal yourself a 5-card poker hand. Each time you get a royal flush, buy yourself a lottery ticket. A royal flush occurs in 1 out of every 649,740 hands. If that ticket wins the jackpot, throw a grain of sand into the Grand Canyon. Keep going, and when you've filled up the canyon with sand, remove 1 ounce of rock from Mount Everest. Now empty the canyon and start all over again. When you've leveled Mount Everest, look at the timer. You still have 5.364 E67 seconds remaining. Mount Everest weighs about 357 trillion pounds. You barely made a dent. If you were to repeat this 255 times, you would still be looking at 3.024 E64 seconds. The timer would finally reach 0 sometime during your 256th attempt. Story 69. If Back to the Future were made today, when Marty got to the past, the music playing in the diner would be Baby Got Back, Jump Around, or Achy Breaky Heart. Story 70. If you took all the planets in our solar system and lined them up side by side, they would comfortably between the Earth and the Moon. Story 71. Maybe not the hardest to believe, but a lot of phonetics surprises people that don't know it. There are 2 separate TH sounds in English, and A, but most people are only taught that there's one for whatever reason. Not that hard to fix the curriculum either. The J sound D is phonetically unrelated to G. It's an affricate between D and the C in leisure. The CH and J sounds T and D are articulated identically besides the vibration of your vocal cords. Same goes for P and B, K and G, T and D, S and Z, as well as and. Might not be surprising to some people, but it's something you really think about. Story 72. If you have 3,000, you are closer to being a millionaire than a millionaire is to being a billionaire. Story 73. Gravity is not a force. It is time dilation within space-time. Everything travels through space-time at the speed of light. Some things more in time, others more in space. All have a vector of length c. Story 74. Statistics, e.g., you flipped a coin 99 times and got heads every time, and still the probability of getting heads on the 100th toss is 50. Answer, your example is actually probability. Statistics is by definition slightly different. It makes inferences about the past. Edit, since this comment got more popular than I expected, I'll give the full distinction below if anyone is interested. Probability, predicting the likelihood of future events given their mathematical definitions, likelihoods. Statistics, analyzing data of past events to try to find and approximate what the likelihood of them occurring was. Basically, statistics is probability done backwards. Instead of predicting the future by using present definitions, probability, it tries to reverse engineer what the starting definitions could have been given the events that occurred. Hence, it's no wonder they get confused, and the same methods are used in both. Story 75. There are different sizes of infinity. In fact, there are an infinite number of different sizes of infinity. It's also tough to wrap your head around which things that are infinite are the same size and which are different. So there are the same number of whole numbers as there are even numbers. There are also the same number of whole numbers as multiples of 100 and there are the same number of whole numbers as there are numbers that can be represented as a fraction, which includes all the whole numbers as 101 counts. But there are more irrational numbers or numbers that can't be represented by a fraction or finite or non-repeating decimal than whole numbers or any of the other ones I've said so far. Also, 0.999. 1 not as close to 1, but 0.99 forever is exactly the same as 1. And the last math one is all the ways that either pi or the golden ratio pop up in nature in weird ways, like in the human body or any animal's body. The golden ratio is found in lots of ratios like eye height to width or face shape, etc. And the closer to that ratio, the more attractive people will tend to think the person is. Story 76. Cooties are 100 curable, draw on bare skin with a fingertip or a pen, and suiting actions to words, chant, circle, circle, dot, dot. Now you've got your cootie shot. Story 77. The man who invented and popularized lated petrol, Thomas Midgley Jr., was the same man who would go on to invent Freon, the greenhouse gas, which was responsible for the destruction of a significant part of the Earth's ozone layer. In his later years, after being disabled by polio, he constructed a convoluted Wallace and Gromit-style pulley system intended to help him get in and out of bed more easily. However, he ended up dying of strangulation after getting entangled in it one morning. Weird stuff. Story 78. Usain Bolt has only spent 114 seconds running in Olympic finals. When you include time running in qualifying rounds, he earned a gold medal every 36 seconds. Story 79. If you say space ghettos in a standard American accent, it sounds like you're saying Spice Girls in a Glaswegian accent. Story 80. Pretty much anything about infinity. If you made an infinite list of every single real number, I could write a number that's not on that list. There are the same number of real numbers between 1 and 2 as between 1 and 7 and as between 1 and infinity. There are infinitely more real numbers between 1 and 2 as there are whole numbers between 1 and infinity. Story 81. Logic isn't a personal thought process. It's an objective system that can be made and measured in what would be akin to mathematical equations. 224 is mathematical logic. I can either be alive or dead. Being dead is a state where the brain no longer functions. I am typing and composing cohesive text. Ergo, my brain is functioning. Ergo, I cannot be dead. Ergo, I must be alive. That is philosophical logic. Story 82. The first black millionaire in the USA was a 12-year-old girl named Sarah Rector. She was an oil tycoon in Oklahoma. Obviously, the white, very racist folks in power did everything in their power to swindle, dissolve, or otherwise steal her money and her resources, even making a law in which her finances were to be controlled by a white man of her choosing. Her own parents, whom lived with her, were thought to be unqualified, with being black and all. Of course, her money was loaned out at an 8 interest rate to white businessmen, while the standard loan rates at that time were 40. Learning real, unadulterated history makes me angry. Story 83. Most Reddit users think they are experts in everything, even though it's just the Dunning-Kruger effect. Story 84. Japanese Navy tested an atomic bomb off in Korea after we firebombed Tokyo to burn the university and the army program and cyclotrons. USA intercepted 400 kilos of yellow cake on a U-boat going from Germany to them when the Europeans surrendered. There was a PBS special on it. Story 85. Mao, Stalin, and Hitler eliminated an estimated 160 million people combined. 160 million. Your brain can't even comprehend that. For comparison, the entirety of Russia is 144 million. Story 86. I can't confirm fact, but it's often said there are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on Earth. You'll never approach comprehending that. Story 87. That we are either alone in the universe or there is other life out there, and both are equally terrifying. Story 88. Half of Reddit don't know the difference between a fact and their opinion. Also, believing something very strongly does not make it a fact. Story 89. The African hunting industry, specifically trophy hunting, is also a primary contributor, the conservation of endangered and non-endangered species in the continent. Story 90. Where does weight go when you lose body weight? When you lose weight, the bulk of that mass, 84, is breathed out as CO2 emission. The rest, 16, is mostly water from sweat, tears, urine, and so on. Source. Story 91. The first vaccine was for smallpox, and the first form of vaccination, variolation, originated from China in the 16th century. The Protestant Reformation and the invention of vaccines are only around 280 years apart. Story 92. A paper folded 42 times would have a width that could reach the moon. At 103 folds, the width would extend beyond the observable universe. Story 93. Biologically, there is absolutely no such thing as race. People just can't cope with the reality that it's just a tribal concept. Story 94. If you pour a glass of water in the sea, wait a few years for it to mix up well, then get a glass of water out of the sea, most probably there would be at least one molecule of the original glass of water in the new glass. That means that there are more molecules of water in a glass of water than glasses of water in all the seas combined. Story 95. There are 4 different nerves, pelvic, hypogastric, sensory vagus, and pudendal nerves, that provide pleasure to the female genitalia area. I find it so hard to believe that some men can still miss all 4 during intimacy. Story 96. Our perception of reality is a completely subjective experience formed by our brains. Everything that is not physical matter is merely a concept we have decided to give meaning. That includes morals, emotions, even languages. None of it exists until we assign meaning to it. Story 97. Sharks predate trees by 100 million years, and also Saturn's rings, edit. Seen this has been posted, but still a great fact. Story 98. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. Let's scale this down to 46 years for simplicity. Us people have been existing for 4 hours. Our industrial revolution began 1 minute ago. Story 99. Octopi are incredibly smart and sentient. They can copy textures and patterns, including things like chessboards, etc. Corvidae are some of the smartest animals. They can make and use tools. They have long-term memories and can memorize faces. Story 100. I have ADD, and I try so hard at my job, and most things I do, but I'm not like other people. I need to stop comparing myself to able-bodied people. I am not one of those people. I am different. I need to come to pair myself with my previous self. I need to cut myself some slack. Story 101. African Americans aren't the race most likely to be eliminated by police. Native Americans are. And as a whole, the majority victim is men. The media and certain activist groups just convince the public that black people are the majority victims and deserve the majority of attention and support. Having their victimhood ignored is a major issue among Native Americans and is hardly even recognized as the major issue it is among men. We also like to compare rates of inequality or issues to white people, but the race least likely to face police brutality isn't white Americans, but Asian Americans. The racial group most likely to be eliminated by law enforcement, in order, is Native Americans, followed by African Americans, Latinos, whites, and Asian Americans. Story 102. Dr. Seuss' harmful behavior. His wife to the point where she committed tragic end and was known to be racist. Story 103. Dinosaurs were around for so long that chronologically, we are closer to the extinction of the dinosaurs than Cretaceous dinosaurs were to Jurassic dinosaurs. Story 104. The Nazi equivalent of James Bond was recruited by the Mossad, Israel's CIA, to become a Nazi hunter after the war. Story 105. That I paid more in taxes in 2017 than Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk. I was a public school teacher who worked 2 jobs. Story 106. The fact that there are no 100 facts other than ones that arise out of linguistics, i.e., all bachelors are unmarried. In science, you can never prove something to be correct. You can only prove something wrong or provide more evidence that happens to support a claim. Story 107. That you, yes you, who's reading this right now, will die someday. Everything you have ever known and loved is just a temporary experience, but you keep living as if it's forever. Cheers. Story 108. A properly shuffled deck of cards is, with an unbelievably high degree of probability, an arrangement of the 52 cards that has never existed before ever, not in any house or casino ever. If every star in the Milky Way had 1 billion planets, and every planet had 1 billion people, and every person had 1 billion decks of cards, and every deck was shuffled 1 billion times a second, starting at the Big Bang, you would only just now be getting a repeat. Story 109. The Nazis hosted rallies in Madison Square Garden and were even supported by the government and local police arresting protesters. Story 110. That female honeybees will close out the male honeybees when the weather changes too cold. The male honeybees don't contribute anything, so they just push them out of the hive. Story 111. How about something fundamental? Time is elastic, so is space. Time ticks faster or slower depending on how fast you are traveling or how much gravity you're standing in. Space warps with gravity. The speed of light is the same no matter what, whether you are running away from it or charging toward the source. Thanks, Einstein. I still can't wrap my brains around this thought. Story 112. Sharks are older than trees, and trees are older than the rings of Saturn. Sharks first happened 450 million years ago. Trees first came about between 350 to 420 million years ago. Saturn's rings first formed somewhere between 10 million to 100 million years ago. Grass first happened 55 million years ago. So it is entirely possibly that the order of events was sharks, trees, Saturn's rings, grass, because sure, why not? Story 113. That Vasily Arkhipov never won a Nobel Peace Prize. X-2200B. Context. In the early 60s during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a submarine that passed the barrier JFK put around Cuba, and the U.S. found it, and they had no contact with anyone. It was also a time where nuclear war almost happened, and they could have launched a nuclear missile, the submarine, which they needed all 3 crew members to agree on. 2 of them agreed, 1 of them didn't. That one was Vasily, meaning that if he agreed with his fellow crew, we most likely wouldn't be here today. The world wouldn't be here today. He's been labeled as the man who saved the world since. I get that the guy was a part of war, but I don't think any of that matters when you save the goddamn world. Story 114. There was a man that was in Hiroshima when the nuke hit and somehow survived. Then he went back to his family in Nagasaki, and when the second nuke hit, he somehow survived again. Story 115. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. John F. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. The names Lincoln and Kennedy each contain 7 letters. Both were particularly concerned with civil rights. Both of their wives lost their children while living in the White House. Both presidents were shot on a Friday. Both were shot in the head. Both were shot with 1 bullet. Both were rumored to be eliminated in a conspiracy. Neither was confirmed to be a conspiracy. Lincoln was shot in the Ford Theater. Kennedy was shot in a card made by the Ford Motor Company, a Lincoln no less. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy. Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both were succeeded by Southerners. Both successors were named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. Their first names both contain 6 letters. John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Lincoln, was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated Kennedy, was born in 1939. Both assassins were known by their 3 names. Both names comprise 15 letters. Booth ran from the theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald ran from a warehouse and was caught in a theater. Both assassins were assassinated before their trials. The only complete filming of Kennedy's assassination was shot by Abraham Zapruder. The only complete account of Lincoln's assassination was written by John Zelfendorfer. A week before Lincoln was shot, he was with friends in Monroe, Maryland. A week before Kennedy was shot, he was with his friend Marilyn Monroe. Lincoln's last child, Tad, had his funeral held on July 16, 1871. Later, he was exhumed and moved to a different gravesite. Kennedy's son, JFK Jr., was lost at sea on July 16, 1999. Later, he was found, brought up, and then reburied at sea. Note 1. Note, it is an urban myth that Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. There is no record of that. 2. Note, there is no record whether or not Kennedy's secretary warned him. 3. Note, Booth actually fled to a farm and was eliminated in a tobacco barn. It might be a stretch to call it a warehouse, but 2 years after his passing, Booth's body was temporarily moved to a warehouse. Also, after the assassination, the government closed the Ford Theater and turned it into a warehouse. Other interesting facts. Apparently, Lincoln had a dream several days before the assassination that he had been eliminated. He told his wife that he had seen himself in a casket. Also, Lincoln's son, Tad, had a pet turkey named Jack. Tad asked his father not to eliminate the turkey for Thanksgiving. Although Harry S. Truman started the official tradition, Lincoln was the first to pardon a Thanksgiving turkey. Now, what would be real interesting is if Kennedy had a pet named Abe or had pardoned someone by that name. Thus far, I haven't heard of that. Skeptics disagree. Some skeptics say that you could take any 2 famous people and find a number of similar type coincidences between them. The only problem with that theory is that there really haven't been any listings of such comparisons, and certainly none has been as extensive as the Lincoln-Kennedy similarities. Summary. Facts concerning the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy are amazingly similar. It is uncertain if such coincidences have any meaning, but they certainly are strange. Story 116. John Tyler, the 10th President of the United States, has a living grandson. Think about that for a second. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States. The grandson in question, Harrison Ruffin Tyler, has a brother, who is now deceased, that was born in 1887. He also had another brother who just died in 2020. Edit, just for some additional frame of reference, when John Tyler was born, the President of the United States was George Washington. Story 117. Casey White, the takedown suspect who recently disappeared with a Lauderdale County, Alabama sheriff's deputy, is 6'9" and 265 pounds, 205 centimeters, 118 pounds, and so far has not yet been spotted. Story 118. In 1944, 9 U.S. airmen were shot down over a Japanese island, and 8 were captured, executed, and eaten by starving Japanese troops. This is now known as the Chichijima Incident. 44 years later, the 9th airman that evaded capture was elected president. Story 119. Marie Curie's body will remain radioactive till another millennium and a half. Not just that, her house, everything she owned will remain radioactive. Story 120. The guy who sang Peanut Butter Jelly Time eliminated himself during a shootout with police after Snoop Dogg tried to talk him down. Story 121. In the end, no matter what you do, no matter who you are, this, and I mean all of this, is kind of worthless in the context of the universe. Story 122. If you're not losing weight, it's because you're eating too much. If you're not gaining weight, it's because you're not eating enough. Story 123. That even if Roe v. Wade is overturned in the U.S. Supreme Court, people will still find and perform abortions. Outlawing abortion doesn't prevent abortion. It only prevents safe abortions. Story 124. 0.9991. It doesn't round to 1. Well, technically it does because it equals 1. It doesn't approach 1. It doesn't represent a limit. It is 1. This can be demonstrated very easily in several ways. The truth here is mathematically undeniable. Despite this, most people deny this fact when it is shown to them, even after they are given the proof. People can't handle the fact that one number can be written in multiple forms. My favorite counterexample, if 0.999 does not equal 1, then 8 does not equal 08. The usual response, but that's different. Story 125. Up to 1 million people can be in the air on airplanes at the same time during the busiest times of the day. Story 126. That one pulley can cut the weight in half, and another can cut it in half again. Always seems like fudge magic. Story 127. The photons from the CMB that have been reaching us since before the sun existed are experiencing the exact same instant now as they were when they were emitted billions of years ago, and will forever keep reaching us while still experiencing that exact same instant. Difficult to express all the weird things, but it's a fact that arises from the CMB being emitted basically everywhere at once, the expansion of the universe, and massless, light-speed traveling, particles having no experience of time due to relativity. It's just weird to think about how the universe will forever have radiation from that moment finally reaching us, and how it's all the same instant to that light. Story 128. The number of subatomic particles in the observable universe is only 10. There is, on average, 30 trillion cells in the human body, and each cell contains 100 trillion atoms. The density of neutron star material is such that 1 TSP would weigh 400 billion tons. There are about 1 billion neutron stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and there is about 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. Story 129. The average number of bones in the human body is 206, but the average number of bones in your mother is 207. Story 130. That everything is almost literally nothing. Atoms are 99 and nothing, but everything is made of them. I mean hard nothing, just empty space. This alone displays the awesomeness of the electrostatic force that keeps everything a thing. But hey, let's rub some balloons on our hair to make it spiky. Story 131. That by the time you read this sentence, you will have traveled about 1,170 kilometers, 727 miles in space. Story 132. Oxford University started teaching in 1096, with full university status by 1249. There are many things we think of as ancient that are much younger than Oxford University. The Magna Carta, modern English, the printing press, the Aztecs, the whole country that is called the United States of America. It's only a tiny bit younger than the Battle of Hastings. Story 133. Jeanne Calment, a French woman, is the human who lived the longest life among all people which date of birth was reliably recorded. She was born in 1875 and died in August 1997. During her life, Alexander Graham Bell patented the phone, and Pathfinder, the Mars probe, landed on Mars in July 1997. She lived long enough to see both the patent of the telephone and the first Mars landing. This gives an idea of how fast technology goes X200B. Also, she drank a glass of Porto every day, smoked until she was 115, and ate 1 kilo of dark chocolate every day. Story 134. The clocks on GPS satellites, which aren't moving that fast, need to correct for the effects of both special and general relativity for GPS to work properly. Story 135. That apparently the universe is extremely fine-tuned for life. In the equation for the expansion of the universe, gravity and dark energy are opposing forces. If the balance was adjusted by 1 part in 10^180th power, you'd either have a too rapidly expanding universe, and life wouldn't have had time to evolve, or the universe would still be too hot for life. That's a 10 with 180 zeros. There are only 1080 fundamental particles in the universe. There have only been 4.xx 1017 seconds since the Big Bang. These are just mind-boggling, saith Blades of Glory, numbers. Story 136. When you shuffle a deck of cards, that is likely the first time that order of cards has ever occurred. There are 52 factorial possible combinations, for an idea of just how insanely big that number is. Story 137. There's 40 different accents in the UK compared to USA's 30 accents, despite the US being 40 times bigger than the UK. Story 138. Every single one of my ancestors going back a few billion years lived long enough to reproduce. The chance that I exist is essentially zero, yet here I am. Story 139. Only 3 stars are born each year, and 95 of all the stars that will ever exist in the universe have already been born. We live at the end of stars' existence. In more ways than one, we are experiencing the beginning of the end of the universe at eternal sources. Story 140. The Muppets character, the Swedish Chef, is known worldwide as the Swedish Chef, except in Sweden, where he is known as the Norwegian Chef. Story 141. Squirrels can't fall to their passing, no matter how high they fall, because they can survive their own terminal velocity. Pretty good superpower. Story 142. That we are spinning around a fiery ball of hydrogen and helium on a planet that is also spinning, held up by nothingness, is the vastness of more nothingness. Story 143. Avocados are the oldest living fruits on the planet. They almost went extinct. Prehistoric sloths would eat avocados and shoot out their seeds, which let the species spread out. At the time, sloths were the main consumer of avocados. The sloths went extinct. The avocado species was on its last leg when, fortunately, humans came along, filled the role of sloths, thus saving the avocado species. Oh, the species were giant sloths, like giant fudge sloths. They look like nightmare fuel. Story 144. If you went really far away from the planet right now, like if you could teleport into space really, really far away, and you look back at Earth, you would see dinosaurs. Story 145. There are a higher number of card deck possibilities than atoms on Earth. 52 cards in a deck, meaning the amount of possibilities is 52 factorial, 52i 51 by 50, which equals 8.06e67. Story 146. That we have one planet to live on, but we're wrecking it because it's inconvenient to not. Just cosmically short-sighted little morons. Story 147. That the people who run the USA regularly wear diapers. Imagine leaving your best interests up to a man who doesn't even know he shoot his britches. Edit. This isn't for any one person in particular. Just based on the age of the average politician, there's no way statistically that some of them don't just let their chute slip out. Story 148. It will take a Google years, 10 with 100 zeros, for the last black holes to die out, and all the remaining particles in the universe will be so far apart that they will never interact with each other. The heat passing of the universe. 10,000 Shanoran Anamayan and man ocean man Sassin Tassin Owen Person after the Buena Vision and Titan Rain die in the Myanmar and Amanadi in Bindani in Man in the 11,000 Hayan and Added. Story 149. The Earth doesn't have its own gravitational force that is pulling us towards the ground. Instead, we are literally falling into the gravitational well created by the Earth's mass, and the ground is stabilizing us. Story 150. You can die from drinking too much water. My grandmother's a nurse. She said if I drink too much water, I can drown on the inside of my body. Story 151. That intelligence is not universally applicable. You might be a neurosurgeon, but that doesn't mean you are an expert at changing tires. Don't argue with your mechanic. He does this all day. You do not. If you are the best mechanic in the shop, it doesn't mean you are a neurosurgeon. If he tells you that you have brain cancer, don't argue. Story 152. There are very few facts. There is a lot of data, but all of it is subject to interpretation. Anybody that says this is 100 fact better, bring receipts, and lots of them. Story 153. Despite all the advance in civilization, we fundamentally still rely on fire for most of our energy needs. Coal power? That's fire. Biomass? Still fire. Nuclear? Extremely advanced fire. Solar? Far away, extremely advanced fire. Cars? Tiny controlled fire explosions. Central heating? Gas fire. Story 154. That we're all just a bunch of atoms that make up a few pounds of electrical meat inside a bone mech covered in meat armor. That's so odd. Story 155. I can't get over the fact that the planet we spend our lives on is over 4 billion years old. It puts in perspective how in the grand scheme of things, our lives mean very little. Story 156. The fastest spinning neutron star known, named PSR J1748 to 2446 AD, rotates at a rate of 716 times a second. Story 157. That Roe versus Wade is possibly overturned. It's your body. You aren't a farm for people's magical belief, religion, created to control others. Someone should make home abortion kits or something. Choose to be a part of society, and being owned by it should be different. Story 158. T-Rex is closer in time to us than to Stegosaurus. Cleopatra is closer in time to us than to the building of the pyramids. Story 159. It's literally impossible to live in the moment. From the time you receive information from your senses to the time you are aware of it is at least 80 milliseconds. Story 160. The egg that eventually made me was created when my grandmother got pregnant with my mother. It blows my mind. Story 161. The United States government had a secret program to document and study UFOs, AWSEP and AATP, as recently as 2017. The NYT broke the story. Last year, the NDAA bill passed and included a congressional mandate to create yet another office to document and study UFOs, their interactions with our military, negative health effects on military personnel, their propulsion technology, and other things. In 2021, there was a classified briefing on UFOs to Congress that one member described as 40 minutes of pure science fiction. Many congresspersons have acknowledged this briefing publicly. If you want to know more, look up the Gillibrand Amendment. Story 162. In NY, if a house is declared haunted by the previous homeowner, it must be declared to potential buyers. Story 163. Singapore has a population of 5.6 million, and yet it is 170 times smaller than NYC, which has a population of 8.4 million. Story 164. When whales die and sink to the bottom of the ocean, their bodies can fill with gases, and in turn, leaving exploding whale carcasses when too much pressure builds in their body. Story 165. That belief itself is dependent upon behavioral inevitability as opposed to actual knowledge about reality, which non-locally contains the illusion of our bodies. Story 166. Since I minored in stats, I always like the fact that if you're in a room with 22 other people, there's a 50-50 chance that 2 people in that room share a birthday. Story 167. That Q-tips aren't supposed to be inserted into the ear canal. When I was little, I believed that was what they were made for. Story 168. You have the jaw strength to bite off fingers, the same amount as you would a carrot, but your brain's limits stop us from doing just that. Story 169. There is enough water in Lake Superior, 3 or 3 quadrillion gallons, to flood all of North and South America to a depth of 1 foot. Story 170. There are more molecules of water in 1 cup than the number of cups of water in all the oceans on Earth. Story 171. The closest planet to Earth is usually Mercury. It's also usually the closest to every other planet, too. Story 172. There are 80,658,175, 170, 943, 878,171,160, 636,856, 403,166, 975,289, 505, 440, 883, 277, 824,000, 1,000. Different ways to shuffle a deck of cards, meaning if you shuffle a deck, you're probably the first to do it in that order ever. Story 173. East Asians don't have apocrine sweat glands, so they don't suffer from rancid BO stank like the rest of us losers when we sweat. Story 174. We went from man first flying in 1909 to having jet planes in 30 years. Likewise, Motorola released the first cell phone, the Dynatac, in 1984, and Apple released the first iPhone, arguably the first real modern smartphone, in 2007, a difference of 23 years. Story 175. A considerable amount of food was only discovered with the New World. You think Italians in 1300 had a nice tomato sauce recipe? Impossible. They didn't eat a tomato until after Columbus. And that's not even close to the only one. Story 176. The average supermarket tomato was bred to withstand an impact of 20 mm. That's stronger than your average car bumper. Story 177. If you were to place all the planets in our solar system from end to end, they'd fit in the distance between the Earth and the Moon. Story 178. There are always people who care you and would be saddened by the loss of you. You being vague here and applying to whomever is reading this comment. Story 179. Whales and dolphins can only hold their breath for an average of 8 to 15 minutes before needing air. They can't stay submerged in the water for long, or else they will drown. Story 180. your relationship is statistically likely to fail. 90 of relationships started before the age of 30 end, and if it doesn't end, that doesn't necessarily mean they're happy. Story 181. Yearly wage theft in the U.S. $39 billion nearly triples the amount of all other theft combined, 14B, and there is no threat of jail time associated with committing the crime. Story 182. Barring air resistance, heavy and light objects fall at precisely the same speed and acceleration. For whatever reason, we all seem to have a lot of trouble wrapping our heads around it. Story 183. There's an order to adjectives in English that native English speakers understand without ever being taught. If you try to say them out of order, it won't sound right. Story 184. That hedge funds closed their 226 short interest on GameStop in 2021. It's mathematically impossible. Story 185. Bunch of old, rich, dumb fucks want to control everything. And we are just along for the ride because 50 of the people in my country are morons that continue to vote for these dumb fucks. Story 186. Most people I meet think the city of Troy is a myth, a Greek fairy tale that never really existed, like Atlantis. This idea is so pervasive that when Total War Troy released, much of the community discourse around the game was claiming that any historical feedback was invalid because it was all made up anyway. Troy was very much a real place, a Luwian city-state and sometimes vassal of the Hittite Empire. Its archaeological remains are well documented and even support the idea that the Mycenaean Greeks and Trojans fought a series of wars during the late Bronze Age, which likely inspired the historical fiction of the Iliad. Edit. Great sources for further reading on Troy include The Trojan War, a very short introduction by Eric H. Klein, The Trojans and Their Neighbors, by Trevor Bryce, and Troy C. 1700-1250 BC by Nick Fields. Answer. There's a cool theory I read ages ago that during one of the sieges, it was apparently fudge over about 10 times, of Troy was taking ages. Then an earthquake happened, which broke the walls and allowed the attacking force to enter. As thanks, the attacking army left a gift to Poseidon, on god of earthquakes. When on land, Poseidon takes the form of a horse. A theory. Story 187. That lightning can strike twice in the same place. The old lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place myth. It does, and very often. Answer. I had a friend in middle school whose house had been struck twice. She told me this while I was at her house, and also told me that both her grandparents died in like 3 inches of water. One had tripped, and one had tried skydiving and landed in a puddle for some reason and couldn't get the parachute off. She was lovely, and so was her family, but I did not continue that relationship. Story 188. The Y2K bug was a really serious issue. It was only due to the effort of teams of developers over several years that we averted serious software issues. The fact that nothing much happened when New Year's hit was a sign of their success. Answer. Y2K was the best New Year's party I ever attended and set the scene for my best prank ever. Right after the countdown, I waited about 5 seconds and then hit the breakers. Everyone screamed. There were a few seconds of panic until someone noticed the streetlights were still on. And then my buddy and I walked out of the basement laughing our jerk off. It was literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. There was no way I wasn't going to let that pass by. Story 189. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Everyone might look at this and say it's ridiculous, but I eat apples all the time and will never get a PhD. Answer. So this slogan was actually a marketing campaign created by the Washington Apple Growers Collective when Prohibition started. Pre-Prohibition, most apples were used to make hard cider. When Prohibition made that illegal, apple growers got understandably concerned about how to sell their product. The solution was to start a massive advertising campaign to convince people that eating raw apples was a good, healthy, normal idea, and one of the most successful advertising campaigns of all time, in my opinion. Story 190. There is an old belief that keeping a wound wrapped up for more than a day or two prevents healing or is overall bad, but it is actually better to keep the wound wrapped for as long as possible to retain moisture and prevent infection, assuming you change out the bandaging regularly. Answer. My husband was in a motorcycle accident about 10 years ago and had some pretty severe road rash on both arms and one leg, despite wearing protective gear. I spent a full month changing out the dressings almost daily. Story 191. MSG is super bad for you. It's pretty much just like salt. Sorry guys, I should have clarified. People say MSG is bad, but it's actually fine for you, Sisho. It's on the same level as salt intake because it's just a type of salt. Story 192. That Rosa Parks' arrest was spontaneous and not staged. She maintained all her life that it wasn't planned or a publicity stunt. She just legitimately didn't feel like moving her jerk one day when some bus driver told her to. Answer: there are legitimately different accounts. The version shared by all accounts is that A, there had been meetings discussing challenging the laws for several months. B, that discussed why certain people were not appropriate figureheads for the movement. C, that Rosa Parks attended. Rosa Parks maintains that, despite that, the action was never planned, but others maintain that it was planned. Story 193. Wow, reading these answers has revealed some kind of learning disability in me. I keep forgetting if it's a double negative or if the comment I'm reading is saying the truth or the falsehood. Story 194. That apple seeds contain arsenic. It's really cyanide, technically something that turns into cyanide in the body. That lime or quicklime will speed the decomposition of a body. A study found it slowed it. Story 195. Camera gear does matter is said to be a myth. In truth, you cannot photograph dangerous wildlife with a phone. Using a phone for wildlife can cause serious injury or passing to you. Answer: camera gear matters, but the saying is referring to the notion that a skilled photographer can produce a photograph at a high standard, even with old or cheap camera gear. Of course, there are many instances where better gear is essential to achieve results, but the things that actually make a photo look professional is lighting, composition, editing, etc. Old camera gear easily lends itself to shooting static, well-lit subjects like landscapes, and newer gear will unlock the less ideal conditions like low light, fast-moving subjects. Story 196. The dingo one is terrible. That poor mother and what she suffered is sad. This worries me because she didn't show her grief in a way that looked right to law enforcement, etc. I am someone who doesn't show my feelings or emotions outwardly, especially if I'm grieving. I've always been the type to deal with things privately, and I don't like expressing my feelings in front of people. The amount of people who get judged by others because they don't cry or show pain is awful. Story 197. That a lot of Black Americans are lying about having indigenous American ancestry. There is a whole paper genocide that happened where dark-skinned indigenous Americans had to choose between the Trail of Tears to reservations or being relieved to colored, eventually Negro, then Black, then African American. This is coming from someone with direct African ancestry. Edit: this is me saying they aren't lying. Realize I worded weird. Story 198. That the British royal family didn't have Nazis in it. Edward VIII, Duke of Windsor and former King of England, King George's brother, had to be exiled to the Bahamas during World War II for providing Germany with intelligence, and the correspondence also shows he urged Germany to relentlessly bomb the UK. Story 199. Perception is reality. Everywhere. What's actually true won't matter the vast majority of people as long as it doesn't upset their personal status quo. Story 200. That lack of sleep is fixed by coffee. Idiot, LOL. I misunderstood the OP. Haha, it's the other way around. Story 201. That French fries come from France. Many people believe that French fries actually came from Belgium, but they actually did originate in France first. Story 202. It is grammatically acceptable to use sheeps and fishes. You just need to be describing more than one breed type of either, i.e. a fish tank with 3 type of fishes, a field with 3 breed of sheeps. Story 203. Blood is thicker than water is very likely the original saying. There are no sources older than 50 years for blood of the covenant. Story 204. One example could be the myth that bats are blind. In reality, most bats can see quite well. They rely primarily on echolocation for navigating in the dark, but their vision is far from being non-existent. Story 205. That snake oil was always a scam. In fact, in many parts of the U.S., snake oil used to be the only good way to get omega-3 fatty acids. There wasn't any fish there. It's just that it was sold as a remedy for everything from mood to hair loss. But it was a valuable nutritional supplement for a lot of people. Story 206. Coca-Cola puts cocaine in their soda. Most people think they stopped in the 1800s, and that's technically true, but they're the only approved importers of coca leaves in the U.S. They extract the cocaine and sell it to the medical industry and use the leftover leaves to flavor the soda. Story 207. People think Hamas are freedom fighters. They aren't. They do not care about Palestinian displacement or poetic justice. They are just Islamists and members of the Muslim Brotherhood who believe in eliminate all the non-believers. and thus want to destroy a non-Islamic, westernized state in the region and build a fascistic Muslim state atop. When Palestinians do support them, they do so because they view it as this might lead to justice. But even they are by large aware that that's not what Hamas really cares about. The passing of non-believers is. Extremely popular statements in the pro-Palestine movement pertaining to freedom fighting and freeing land have like zero connection to Hamas ideology or Palestinian terrorists that came before. They are merely just distractions away from this eliminate non-believers ideology, brainwashing tactics to assist in the normalization and facilitation of it, an indoctrination tactic in journalism, a PR shield for something far weirder. People who believe Hamas are freedom fighters really need to talk to an actual Palestinian person sometime, lol. Answer: the vast majority of those who sympathize with the Palestinian plight are well aware Hamas are pieces of shit. They are simply expressing their disgust for the oppression of these people, not only by their own shit government, but also by the pieces of shit in Netanyahu's government who have tried to prop Hamas up, because they are a great excuse to never even try for a two-state solution. Something the hardliners in power in Israel right now want to avoid at any cost. Story 208. There are biopics that put in moments that never happened and take out things that did because the reality doesn't match their preconceived notions. Story 209. The idea that we only use 10 of our brains is a common misconception, as research shows that we actually use all parts of our brain. Story 210. Something widely accepted as false but actually true, the 5-second rule for dropped food. Because let's face it, we all know it's more like a 5-minute negotiation with our germophobic side before we finally give in and eat it anyway. Story 211. People who smoke or have obesity have lower lifetime health costs than the average person, so they are not a burden on the health system. Yes, I am outside the U.S., where we have a decent public health system. The reason is simple. They live about 10 years fewer than average. Story 212. That if you want kids, you need to get started by 30 at the latest. This somehow became very offensive to many and declared as outright false, with the media pumping out articles about celebrities having kids in their 40s or even later, talking about how women can have it all and enjoy a career before having kids when they are ready and not before. Well, no. That's all BS. Of course, pregnancy can happen anytime during the course of a woman's fertility, but can happen and will happen are not the same thing. It's one thing to just stop with the birth control, and if it happens, it happens, but getting pregnant on purpose past your early 30s is often really difficult. I have 4 different couple friends about my age, late 30s, who are all having to resort to IVF because they spent their whole life thinking they had time and getting pregnant was as easy as not wearing a condom. It's expensive, very uncomfortable, and absolutely not guaranteed to work because much like a natural pregnancy, the odds of success plummet post-30. So yeah, ladies, if you know you want kids, don't put up with guys who aren't sure and will see how things are later on. That guy can change their mind, break up with you, and date a 28-year-old to have kids. You don't have that option. It's not fair, but it's unfortunately true. Edit. Replies from people demanding studies and data, while also showing they very clearly were not able to read this comment fully and understand it, are going to be ignored. If you can't understand my point, you sure as shoot shouldn't be trying to interpret scientific data. Answer. The study that supports the idea that fertility declines sharply is a repeatedly cited study based on 18th-century French peasants who lived very different lives and had very different fertility issues. Menarche stated later, no medical support, access to food. Your fertility declines slightly and the risk for mutations rise slightly, like from 0.5% to 1%. This comment is 100 correct. It only gets discussed a lot because 1% of a million is still a lot. But age alone is unlikely to statistically impact you as an individual. Story 213. Consciousness, emotions, and anything else cerebral or otherwise that is characteristically human or otherwise can be adequately modeled in a computer. Simply put, you can create an electronic brain in a computer capable of the same experience as our meat brains. Answer. You aren't wrong, but you aren't necessarily correct either. People get confused because of the name neural networks, which, as we correctly use them, are tangentially related to the actual cells at best. That aside, the issue is that we don't really understand everything that's going on in the brain, so any recreation is at best an approximation. I know people have coded very simple organisms and had them learn things, but the rate at which they learned was far below the rate at which the actual creatures learned, and they were only teaching it one simple thing: going outside this box is bad. The issue is that there's still too much we don't know. All of that said, I do think that's an interesting topic to study, and that we'll get there eventually. At that point, we can start worrying about AI taking over. Story 214. Wyverns or dragons? This is one of those inconsequential things that nevertheless really gets on my nerves. The distinction between dragons and wyverns only exists in the heraldry of 2 or 3 specific countries. Dragon has always been an extremely generic umbrella term for any vaguely reptilian mythical creature. There is no mythological or folkloric requirement that they have 4 legs and 2 wings. In fact, the earliest depictions usually didn't have any limbs at all, since dragon comes from a Greek word used to describe giant snakes. Story 215. My large extended family seems to believe it's false that I'm a piece of shoot, when in fact quite the opposite. Story 216. Of course they don't deserve it, but it was an inevitable consequence of their actions. They knew the risks and did it anyway. No refuting that. Story 217. Napoleon Bonaparte was not as short as people think he was. It is true that he was 5'1", 5'2", but that was in French inches, which were a little longer than the British inches that are now standard in the United States. His converted height in the inches many of us are familiar with would be about 5'6", which was pretty average, if not slightly above average, in the 1800s. Story 218. When women plead with their men to get their shoot together, or they're going to have to leave. Gentlemen, you will find out if you continue to F around BC. She's not kidding. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.